Hey, in this episode, we are going to cover how to sell your therapy practice for top dollar using Adbacks to increase your EBITDA. I'm Dave Kittle, the physical therapist and the owner of Concierge Pain Relief Home Physical Therapy in New York City. And I'm also the CEO of the Fieldmaker Group. We are currently acquiring physical therapy practices in the New York and New Jersey area. Let's get into today's free training. First of all, I have nothing to sell you. I just want to full disclosure. We're putting out great, hopefully valuable and helpful content for therapy practice owners just like you, so that you learn more about this process, can understand negotiations, your financials, and how to potentially sell for max value or top dollar, which is typically what therapy practice owners care about. If they've ever thought about selling some or all of their practice, if they've considered exiting. Anyway, let's get into it. So now, why should you care about the slide presentation? That's really ultimately your time is very valuable. That is what you should be caring about. Why listen into this? If you are listening now on iTunes or Spotify, I definitely implore you, jump over to the YouTube. I have a slide presentation. I have some financial charts, some numbers and things where we're going to talk about Adbacks and EBITDA and adjusted EBITDA. So if you're listening now on iTunes or Spotify, this still will be valuable and helpful to you on the go. But if you can dedicate some time to jump in front of the slide presentation on YouTube for this episode, I believe it'll be much more helpful and much more valuable. So let's get into it. Why should you continue listening or watching this on YouTube, assuming now you jumped over to YouTube? So because in this short presentation, you will learn many more factors on how you can legally and ethically sell your therapy practice for top dollar. So if you ever thought about selling some or all of your therapy practice, and other than making sure that your loyal staff are taken care of, which is certainly important in that whole process, what you ultimately care about is selling for max value or top dollar. You want more than what's fair, or you want at least what's fair, if not whatever is market rate at that time, right? So you put a lot of time and effort into growing your therapy practice, years and a lot of heartache and a lot of effort. So you deserve market rate, max value, or even top dollar in some cases. And this certainly depends on a lot of factors, including your financials, which is what we're going to go over today. So now what we're going to do, we're going to define a few terms so that you can learn a little bit more on how to negotiate, which if you're a therapy practice owner, we might buy your practice in New York or New Jersey. That's what we're doing. So yes, it is a little counterintuitive as to why would we be putting out information like this, that where you're going to be able to use this information and negotiate more firmly with us. So we believe that if X amount of practice owners watch this type of stuff, they'll learn more about this whole process. They will start to know, like, and trust myself and our group more, and potentially want to sell to us like a PT owner group or a therapy owner group, as opposed to a corporate or some other buyer. So that's why we're putting out this. This is all marketing. This is content marketing. This is why we're putting this out there. So now that you can learn how to best negotiate and learn all this instead of going into this process as an unknown or approaching it as it's an unknown and not sure how to navigate it. So that's why we're doing this. So let's get into it. You might hopefully be able to find some common ground with prospective buyers when considering what you believe to be top dollar. On this free training, we're going to be covering Adbacks and discussing how Adbacks can increase your overall asking price, ultimately increasing your exit price, whether you're selling 100% of your practice or if you're selling 65% of your practice, and maybe keeping some meaningful equity position in the practice. This also, it depends whether you're going to continue to treat patients or not. That's a whole other conversation. We're putting out other information around that. So owner Adbacks. Owner Adbacks are Adbacks to your profit, to your overall EBITDA. And more on Adbacks in a second. If you don't know what EBITDA is, you do need to learn it. We have other interviews. We're interviewing therapy practice owners who have sold to other buyers in the past. We're interviewing brokers, M&A advisors, accountants, lawyers on our show, on my show, the Dave Kittle Show. And you do need to learn it. I'm going to review it right now with you. And hopefully, if you don't already know it, then it's something that you might be able to have as a takeaway today. So really quick, let's briefly touch on EBITDA, EBITDA. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And EBITDA measures the company, or in this case, your therapy practice, the therapy practice's overall financial performance. And EBITDA is used as an alternative to other metrics of assessing and valuing a practice or valuing a business. It's an alternative to other metrics such as earnings, revenue, and income. And now, is EBITDA the same thing as net income? The net income that is listed as a line item on your yearly tax returns. Is EBITDA the same thing as net income? No, it is not. EBITDA is essentially net income or earnings with, as we mentioned, with the interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization added back in. So we'll get into a little bit more of that. Now, let's go into Adbacks. As a therapy practice owner, why should you care about Adbacks? Well, because this is a big factor in selling your therapy practice for top dollar. You won't be able to sell your therapy practice and get the purchase price that you want without learning about Adbacks. And in this process, maybe your broker teaches you a little bit about Adbacks, maybe your accountant. If you have a financial advisor, there might be some folks in your corner. You definitely should have some type of an advisor. You don't necessarily need a broker, but many practice owners do use a broker. They'll probably teach you this and educate you more on this if you don't already know it. But again, this type of a presentation you can watch and learn remotely. So hopefully it's an adjunct to the folks that are in your corner, your advisors that are in your corner during this process as you're moving into it, or maybe you're already in the thick of it right now. So now most buyers will value your practice on EBITDA, like we just mentioned. There's other buyers, there's other areas of sometimes real estate or other transactions where they're using something called SDE, Seller's Discretionary Earnings, SDE, but that's not typically the case with therapy practices, PTOT practices, healthcare practices, and transactions. For us, we're using EBITDA, and that's most often used in healthcare transactions when valuing your business, your therapy practice. Also, this is what therapy brokers are using to value your practice. So they're going to be, we're using EBITDA as like, to make sure we're all kind of speaking the same language, that we're all agreeing on, like, here's how we would value this therapy practice asset. Here's how we're going to value it. We use EBITDA. So if you get a business broker, like I said, they will be using EBITDA. And after factoring in your add backs and adjustments, brokers and buyers, so the broker that might represent you, and then us, the buyers, will typically come up with an adjusted EBITDA. Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to agree on the adjusted EBITDA. And that's where the negotiation happens of what items. And we're going to go over some of those items today in this presentation. But then it becomes, there's an EBITDA number and then there's an adjusted EBITDA number. I have some charts today in the slide presentation to kind of show you, to give you a little visual. As I'm saying, if you're on the iTunes podcast or Spotify, jump over to YouTube, you'll be able to see those charts. Let's get into it further. The greater the EBITDA, the greater the purchase price you can demand or negotiate for your therapy practice, which is certainly important, right? Now, here's a quick chart. We're going to get into the first chart here. Here's a quick chart to show EBITDA, Adbacks, adjusted EBITDA, and how it affects your overall valuation and overall asking price. So this is the source is company financial statement. I pulled this off some website. This right here. So we'll start at the very top line. Net income after taxes for this hypothetical, this business. Net income after taxes, $600,000. There's interest expense, $150,000. Taxes, income taxes, $300,000. Depreciation expenses, $200,000. Amortization expenses, $10,000. Obviously, if you're a therapy practice owner, you may not have some of these. Maybe you don't have amortization, for example. You might not have some of these items, but typically you'll have maybe some of them. And ultimately, you're going to have what you understand as your net income after taxes. You probably know that number on an annual basis, or what it's been either before COVID, during COVID, or now in the thick of it. Ultimately, let's focus on these two bolded numbers. So the first bolded number is EBITDA. So for this anonymous hypothetical business here, EBITDA of $1.26 million. So $1,260,000 as EBITDA. So once that's been defined from the financials, from looking at, again, the net income and adding back in the the taxes, the interest, the depreciation, amortization, et cetera, that's where we would come up with an EBITDA number. And then the secondary part is the adjusted EBITDA, which is kind of the crux of this whole presentation. How do we go from EBITDA to adjusted EBITDA? EBITDA is without owner's compensation and excess payments to the owner. So we would get to the adjusted EBITDA by adding in this case, the excess compensation to the owner on an annual basis, $200,000. So maybe the owner is paid, I don't know, $80, $90, $100,000 as a salary, maybe more, maybe less on an annual basis. And then there's going to be owner draws or dividends or distributions, however the therapy practice and the accountant has it arranged. So then it might total the excess compensation paid to the owner of $200,000 on an annual basis and excess lease payments to the owner. So in this case, excess lease payments to the owner, this would be assuming, I didn't know this when I put this chart in the slide presentation, but this would assume that the owner, I believe, would own the real estate of where the practice is located. So excess lease payments to the owner, so the practice is paying above market rate in lease payments to the owner. So the owner owns the real estate of where the therapy practice is located, and the owner, the same individual, owns the therapy practice, and the therapy practice is paying lease payments monthly to the landlord, who in this case is the same person. It's common, it happens. We speak to some owners, less in New York because of the cost of real estate, but it does happen, and it's more common in New Jersey, and it's certainly more common elsewhere, Pennsylvania and other states, as you all know, and have colleagues that might end up buying the real estate of the practice, of the location. So those would be adjustments, right? So that's where we would get to an adjusted EBITDA number. So we have EBITDA, to recap, 1.26 million. Then we have these add backs, the excess owner compensation, 200 grand, excess lease payments to the owner, 100 grand. That extra 300 grand would be added back in to create this adjusted EBITDA number, this $1.56 million adjusted EBITDA number. Now, if you speak with a broker, if you work with a broker, typically they're going to have all this arranged before they contact us, or they contact other corporate buyers, or they contact us as a therapy owner group type of thing. They're going to have like a financial package of your financials, and they'll, make sure that we sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, before we interface and before we communicate. And obviously you, the therapy practice owner, and your broker will want to utilize adjusted EBITDA with the Adbacks to get top dollar, because obviously if you have the 1.2 is lower, the EBITDA number 1.26 is lower than the 1.56. So of course you would want the larger number. And that's part of this whole presentation of the Adbacks. You can now see just in this short example that with the Adbacks, now your overall adjusted EBITDA number is larger. Then the next step would be we all subjectively negotiate the multiple of adjusted EBITDA. So ballpark times 3, but it really can depend. It can go 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 7 in some cases if the therapy practice is larger and has more net income, cash flow on a calendar year. If they have multiple locations, they have a lot of staff that has been there for years and have retained staff, which would show stability to the buyer. But ultimately, you will want to get to that adjusted EBITDA number, which your accountant will help you with, your broker will help you with, an M&A advisor may help you with. It really depends on who's in your corner. So that's the first chart. So anyway, back to Adbacks a little bit more. Adbacks are valuable because the more that you can show, the higher that you can sell your therapy practice for. Obviously, again, showing, meaning demonstrating, listing out and having them actually be items that actually were paid for and that were legitimate. We'll get more into that. Practice owners will legally write off many items and qualify for many tax deductions, as they should. They're providing a valuable service to the community, and they are in the position where they took a lot of risk to do so and took a lot of time and effort away from their families to build up their practice. So of course, they should qualify for many of these tax deductions. And that's just the way the IRS tax code was drafted and is in existence still today. These are considered Adbacks to profit, right? And an owner like you will want to document these deductions that will not occur or will not reoccur for a buyer who may buy your business. I'll just say that again. So an owner like you will want to document these deductions that will not occur and will not reoccur for a buyer who may acquire that business, acquire your practice. Now, the ultimate test is, will these expenses occur when the new buyer acquires your business? Will these expenses occur when the new buyer buys and takes over your business? Many Adbacks include all these things that you guys already know: travel, entertainment. In some cases, we've seen all the family cars and all the family members' cell phone plans on the business books as deductions. And if these deductions were all part of performing job duties and job functions to generate new business or marketing, or traveling to continuing education courses, trade association meetings and conferences like CSM, APTA, private practice section, your state's chapter meetings, those types of things, then they may be considered Adbacks to profit. We break down Adbacks in two categories. Here's where we're going to make things crystal clear, very, very simple. And when I say we, it's like my team, but also we as like the collective, buyers and seller market. Like, this is how typical Adbacks are broken down into two categories. Very, very simple. This is what a lot of investment bankers will utilize, brokers, et cetera. We should probably all find common ground on agreeing to this. So let's get into the two categories. Number one, non-business related Adbacks. Number two, non-recurring or extraordinary or extraordinary Adbacks. So number one, non-business related Adbacks. Number two, non-recurring or extraordinary Adbacks. The key part about these Adbacks is whether the expense drives revenue growth. This is how we make it very, very simple. Does the Adback drive revenue growth or not? And if currently the Adback drives revenue growth, such as, anything that marketing, anything that's in that component, if it drives revenue growth for you now as the owner, and if you sell your practice and another buyer takes over, that buyer will want to have those same expenses that drive revenue growth, and therefore they're typically not going to be an Adback to profit, because those are required to continue to ramp up and grow the practice and expand the business, as opposed to the non-business related. So we'll get into that further. If they do not drive revenue growth, they can be considered an Adback. If they do drive revenue growth, that's a function of the business, like whether it's Facebook ads, Google ads, things that are marketing expenses is like the easiest thing to consider. Any marketing expense that you do now or you did last year or the year before, a buyer is going to look at that and say, well, yeah, we might want to do that too. We might want to do Facebook ads, Google ads, whatever type of marketing, because we want to drive new business. We want to have more marketing exposure. We want to get more eyeballs on our website, more traffic on our website. We want to get more foot traffic into our clinic. So it could be advertising workshops, things like that, demonstrations, talks, events, things like that. All of that would be driving revenue growth. So if they do not drive revenue growth, they can be considered an Adback. Hopefully, again, with the slides following along, it's like, hopefully it'll keep me on track and keep everything very super simple and clear. Always keep this revenue generating premise in your mind when determining what is an Adback. Now let's dive into non-business related Adbacks. Non-business related Adbacks are considered owner's perks, totally legit, totally fine. That's the way it should be. Again, you took all the risk and the effort to open a practice, open a business, grow it, all of that. You deserve owner perks, and that's just the nature of the IRS tax code and the nature of the free market system here in the beautiful US of A. So these allowances, or sometimes termed benefits, are things that you as the owner receive because you're the owner of the business. The main part to consider is the owner's compensation. Consider if it is customary to have a car allowance for the type of business that you own. And if these have been put through your practice's financials and the related insurance expenses for these vehicles, these expenses are expenses the business incurred resulting from business operations that are not in the normal course of business. And any charitable or political donations made by the practice that are not considered crucial to the continued success of the practice. And since these expenses are likely to incur in the future, keep them handy when preparing your financial statements, your documents when selling your practice. Of course, that only makes sense. So these are considered non-recurring expenses and they can be added back to normalize income. So now let's look at a hypothetical physical therapy's financials. Here we go, second chart here, physical therapy practice, let's just say so 1.5 million in annual revenue. And again, these are all hypothetical. There's no name here. This is just something I made up for this presentation. Annual revenue, 1.5 million. Let's say the practice has a measured EBITDA of 250,000, which again, your broker will dive in or your financial advisor, your accountant, etc., your banker, whoever it might be, will help you derive that number. If you're financially savvy, maybe you'll be able to do that yourself. And then us as well on the buy side, we would look at your financial statements, your tax returns, your income statement, your balance sheet, your profit and loss statement. We'll look at your financials, and then we'll look at and probably come up with an EBITDA number. Typically, we'll come up with an EBITDA number. Then we're going to look at the Adbacks. So now in this hypothetical situation, we got 1.5 million in annual top line revenue, EBITDA of $250,000, Adbacks of $200,000. So you take the 250K and the 200K from EBITDA and the Adbacks, and a very simple rudimentary demonstration. Now we have an adjusted EBITDA of $450,000. So the EBITDA multiple, again, is subjective. That's part of the negotiation. The lower, there's a sliding scale of EBITDA multiple. If it's a solo therapy practice, you don't have as much leverage to get a higher multiple of EBITDA unless you have a lot of staff. Maybe it's a large location. Maybe you have a lot of cash pay services, monthly memberships that are recurring for clients that are coming to do wellness services or have, like a gym membership. Those types of things will potentially have a higher multiple of EBITDA. So the number 3x EBITDA, it's like for service-based businesses, it's kind of like where we all start. If it's a solo PT practice, oftentimes a solo, like one therapist in the practice is not usually valuable. So sometimes those practices might be valued at like 1 times EBITDA or, at the most 1 times revenue. But let's just focus on this EBITDA multiple for this example is 3. That's all subjective. That's a whole other conversation. So if you're taking the EBITDA number of $250,000 times 3, so times a 3 times multiplier of EBITDA, valuation of $750,000. Of course, you as the practice owner, you're going to say, hey, but what about my Adbacks? What about expenses that the therapy practice owner is using with the family cars, the family cell phone plan, season tickets to the Yankees, the Mets, the Eagles, the Phillies, whatever, like things that are owner perks. And again, the above market compensation, the above market distributions, the above market lease payments, if that owner is the landlord, all those types of things, you have to add that back in. Of course, that's only right. And so rather than the valuation being $750,000, in this example, the valuation would be $1.35 million. For this type of a rudimentary example at a 3 times multiple. Now, if you're watching this and if you're saying, well, my therapy practice is doing 1.5 million and there's no way I would want to sell for 1.35 million, that's also a whole other conversation where then it gets into a negotiation. Like, so then what's the unencumbered free cash flow of the practice? Ultimately, that's how it's valued. So how can you show us that if we're saying it's worth 3 times EBITDA and you're saying it's worth 4 times EBITDA or 5 times EBITDA, that's where the negotiation happens. But we have to kind of see what's the unencumbered free cash flow, that if we took out your 3 family cars on the business books, if we took out the whole family's cell phone plans and all other family gym memberships, the family members, all these expenses that are typically legally put through the business books, but would not be on the books if we bought your practice. If we bought your practice, they would not be on the books next quarter or next year or whatever. So then therefore, there would be more free cash flow in the therapy practice, in the business. and therefore allowing you to show more free cash flow, which then allows you to negotiate for a higher adjusted EBITDA dollar amount and or EBITDA multiple. And if you can show that, then that is how you can sell for top dollar, because you're showing the buyer, hey, here's how we can de-risk this situation. If we took out all of these, expenses that are not driving revenue growth, here's your free cash flow. Here's what it would be. And then maybe it would be, north of $500,000 of adjusted EBITDA, or maybe even more, right? And typically a buyer will want to look at the trailing 12 months. So we're going to look at the last 12 months. Now, we've been certainly flexible with owners, because even when we were speaking to owners last year, and it's, everyone's rebounding from COVID. So there's some owners that say, hey, look at my last 3 or 4 or 5 years. Can we take an average of that? In some cases we can, because obviously in 2018 and 2019, many therapy practices were doing much, much better, obviously before COVID happened. So that's also a whole other conversation. Does that make sense? Let me know if you have any questions, if you have any concerns. You may have some feedback for me. I wanted to make this presentation for therapy practice owners that also some were actually irritated or insulted on one of the previous episodes that I did on another a spreadsheet where I was showing practice A versus practice B, and they were both doing $1 million, and practice A was doing $250,000 a year in net income of net profit, and practice B was doing $15,000 per year. And I gave that example to just show the difference in like the value, the difference in net profit and things that we've seen. And then I had a lot of owners, several privately, publicly, contact me, and they were really mad because I didn't mention anything about Adbacks. I mean, I did mention Adbacks in that video, but I didn't give like a list of like, okay, here's the Adbacks that, here's how, you would be able to get another extra $100,000, $200,000 of Adbacks on your books that you have, that then instead of having $15,000 that you're declaring to the IRS every year as net profit, if you have an extra $200,000 of Adbacks, then now all of a sudden your net income, your net profit would be $250,000, which is then similar to practice A in that example. So I wanted to make this slide presentation because I had a lot of owners give me feedback and give me some heat about that presentation that I put out, I think a week or so ago. And I wanted to make this to show, like, of course, like if you have these Adbacks that are on the books, but they don't drive revenue growth, then of course we're going to use those as Adbacks. We're going to agree with you on that, and then show, like you help us show with your line items and your deductions and your list of these items of the, like I said, of the multiple cars, the family cars on the business, that all of those family things that are owner perks or above market compensation for the owner, or other places where money is being either parked or spent or et cetera legally, but to avoid a large tax bill. I get it. And so that's why I wanted to make this whole presentation about Adbacks. If you have more Adbacks, you can show a higher EBITDA number or an adjusted EBITDA number. And then therefore, regardless of the EBITDA multiple, you will be able to sell for a higher dollar amount, right? So if you have a physical therapy practice or a therapy practice in New York or New Jersey, whether it's in-home only or a hybrid in-home or outpatient or just outpatient only, if you have a PT practice, PT, OT, et cetera, a therapy practice in New York, New Jersey, and if you've ever thought about or considered selling some or all of your therapy practice, feel free to reach out. Email me, Dave at conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE at conciergepainrelief.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on Facebook, wherever, and reach out. If you'd like to speak confidentially, speak privately, of course, I can shoot you an email of a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. We can sign that before we talk about anything. Or of course, we would sign that typically before we look at any financials of your financials or talk any more significantly. Any or all of those conversations will remain between you and I, or between you and your team, your broker, your accountant, et cetera, and my board and my group. Outside of that, it's going to stay between us. There's no point of me, we want to keep things private and confidential, because why would we want to have any owners upset or mad at us? That wouldn't make any sense. That would not be aligned with our interests. So we are looking to acquire profitable and cash flowing, reputable practices in the New York and New Jersey area. If that sounds like you, feel free to reach out. It's never too early. And we might be able to introduce you to, brokers or financial advisors that we know or that we've interviewed on this podcast that might be able to help you. And that's it for right now. Catch you next time on the Dave Kittle Show. Thanks for your time. Bye. Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? We might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE@CONCIERGE painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.